morning. So glad to have you all here today. Thank you for joining us this morning. We are continuing our God's Calling series here at Forum. Our goal is to hear the stories of different Zumbro members and some of the ways God has been active in their lives, some ways that are obvious, some that are a little bit less obvious along the way. This morning I am delighted to have with us at Forum today Katie Nelson. Katie has been a member of Zumbro for a long time. She is currently a college student. She'll tell you a little more about her story. But she has had God present in her life in tangible ways and leading ways for many years, and she is absolutely fantastic. I'm excited to have her here. So I invite you to welcome Katie Nelson.
So as Shelley said, God's been present in my life for a really long time, and but the one thing that I've learned along the way is that He throws a lot of curveballs, and you never really know when they're gonna come. And so I'm just gonna share a little bit about my journey with Him. So starting back when I was super young, I grew up in a Christian home. My parents took me to church every week. I did the whole Sunday school thing, so you could say that I did everything by the book. But I never felt like I had a personal relationship with God. I just sort of did what everyone expected of me. And then fast forward a little bit, and I turned 12. My best friend committed suicide, and then 2 months later, my aunt died from ovarian cancer. So for a 12-year-old to deal with that much death in a short period of time, I didn't know how to deal with it. I was just super lost. I didn't know how to talk to anyone about it. That's a lot to process. And so, since I didn't feel like talking out loud, I started to pray. And God showed up, and it was super great and super okay, what do I do now? But the fact was that He showed up, and it was really exciting. And so that's when I sort of started to feel okay, you're here, let's have a relationship. And so fast forward to 8th grade, and Jonathan Davis, who most of you probably know, approached my mom and was like, Katie has got to go on this mission trip. And I was like, no, I can't do it. I'm so shy. I'm not going to have any friends. I can't do it. And he was like, there's one spot left and you're going. You don't have an option. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm going. And so it ended up being super great, and the people were all so nice. And what I learned was that I really enjoyed helping people, and I loved being around people. And we were doing, my project was to work in a daycare center, which I didn't think was a big deal at all. Whoop-de-ding-dong. Who am I helping here? But what I realized is that even when you're doing such small things, you're doing great things. And so that's when I realized that people is my thing. So in high school, I stayed involved in tons of activities. I was on a missions trip every single year. Just continued to help people, and it was great. And I felt God was with me every time. But also, so then junior year, my grandma fell, and she broke her tailbone and ended up in the hospital, and we thought she was not going to make it. And so that experience was super hard because we're really close. And but that's when I realized I have a passion for geriatrics. And I love them. It's my favorite thing. And so, but when my grandma was in the nursing home, she received really terrible care. And so I sort of started thinking, okay, well, maybe when I grow up, I'll work in healthcare. Maybe I'll be a doctor. Maybe, I don't know. Just sort of throwing ideas around. And so I sort of, that was God working then, because I never expected that I would end up feeling so passionate about elderly people. I was 15, 16, and I was obsessed, and it was crazy. So, let's see. So at this point, she's still in the nursing home, and I was in need of a job. And one of my friend's dads worked at a assisted living facility and was like, hey, want a job? And I was like, sure. And so I did it, and I had no idea what to expect, and ended up, I was just like a waitress in the dining room, but it was like, oh, I just loved going to work. And it was so much fun, and so I worked there junior year, senior year, and then I kept working there once I went off to college, and got super close with the residents, just absolutely loved it. And so then I was sort of like, okay, like, I think this is, like, God, what are you trying to tell me? And so I think at that point, like, I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew I had a direction. So I started sort of following wherever he led me. Freshman year of college, I was up at Bethel University in the Twin Cities. And that was another rough year. I lost another friend, a girl I played on the golf team with, and I kept getting like, okay, rewind. I was like lining up volunteer opportunities to start building my resume, and I thought I had everything figured out, and then God led me into hospice, and I was like, funny joke, like, I can't do that, there's no way. But, so I came home, and I ended up transferring schools, so I'm now here in Rochester, living at home, and I'm volunteering for hospice now. Crazy. And that has been like the thing that has totally shaped who I am, and it was the scariest thing I've ever done, but that was all God, because if he wouldn't have led me there, I never would have ended up in that situation. So then last year, September, I got another curveball, and I've always wanted to go to Africa, but I didn't know, I needed like a program that I knew was safe, because I obviously didn't want to get into trouble in Africa. And he presented me with this opportunity to do an internship in Tanzania. And so I applied, got it, and so this summer, I spent 5.5 weeks there interning at a hospital. And so now I've unmasked this other passion I have for helping people around the world. Like, oh, you guys, I can't even explain how great it was. So while I was there, I worked under different physicians, and they don't have a specific geriatric department. I did a lot in pediatrics, which was also crazy because that's not really my thing either. But while I was there, I spent a lot of time with one of the palliative care nurses going out into the villages around the hospital, handing out hospice kits like we do here at church. And that was like my passion for hospice mixed with Africa, and voila, it was, oh, so good. So at this point, I'm like, okay, because before I left, I was like, okay, I'm going to be a geriatric doctor. So I thought I had it all figured out. And then I go to Africa, and now I'm like, okay, now I don't really know what I'm doing. Am I going to work in Africa? I don't really know. So my sophomore year and this year have been like a lot of exploration and trying to figure out exactly where God wants me. But at this point, I've sort of realized I just need to go with the flow because I don't know where he's taking me next. I'm a pre-med and I'm studying to be a doctor, but after graduation, everyone keeps asking me, what are you going to do when you graduate? And I'm like, I don't know. I know I don't want to go to medical school right away because can't think about that yet. But, so I've done some volunteering up at Global Health Missions, where we are sort of in partner with for EAMBI, and the director up there keeps planting seeds in my head, like, you know, you'd be a really great missionary, doctor, and like, have you thought about this opportunity? I get emails from him like every other day. Hey, want to go to this conference? And I'm like, sure. So I don't really know. Like medical missions, maybe I won't even be a doctor. I don't know, but I do know that it took me a really long time to trust God like fully and be like, okay, you're in control. But I'm learning His plan is always better. So I just need to follow Him wherever He takes me in this crazy journey. So.
You are 20?
20.
20. Have had certainly plenty of curveballs in your life along the way. As we mentioned earlier, part of this goal of thinking about God's calling is helping all of us figure out, does God speak and how do we know? So you started by saying your passion was for geriatrics. Tell me about that. What is it about working with elderly people that gets you so excited?
Well, I've always been super close with my grandma, and her and I are very similar, but okay, growing up, that was not the case. She drove me up a wall, and she was always asking, like, oh, do you have a boyfriend? And I was like, I don't want to hear that every time I come and visit you. But then when she ended up in the hospital, I sort of realized, like, okay, well, if this is it, like, there's so much that I don't know about you. And so we would sit and just talk, and I learned so much about her that I didn't know. And so then when I started working at this job, it was like, oh, it was so cool just to sit with the residents and learn about their life and what life was like back then and all the cool things that they've done. And it feels so cool to be able to help people that have gone through life and done so much already, and I don't know, give back to them so they can have a break, kind of.
Do you feel like when there's this mutual relationship that's built as you have a chance to do some listening and give respect, that they're taking something from your energy and enthusiasm too?
Not always. So obviously not all elderly people are very enthusiastic, but I do know that they're very thankful to have the help that they do. And so, but like, if I come in and I'm just like, hey, what's up? Super enthusiastic like that, they usually get excited too. So
that's something that you feel you can give.
Yeah.
Like God. Nice. One of the things that Katie did when she was still here at Zumbro as a peer minister was organize some intergenerational lunches. How many of you participated in an intergenerational lunch? A number of you did. Tell us a little bit about where that came, what happened, where that came from, and what you liked best about it.
That was on a peer ministry retreat. That was so long ago. We were talking about how, well, I mean, but we were trying to figure out how we could give back to the church and sort of bridge the gap between the older generations and my generation. And obviously I have a huge passion for geriatrics, and so I was like, guys, like, let's try this out. Like, and so I had no idea if it would work or not, but then we ended up starting doing these lunches, and everyone else in my grade was like, oh, that's gonna be so weird, like, what if it's awkward? Like, I don't want to sit down at a table with them. I won't know what to say. So we made like conversation cards, and we set them in the middle of the table in case the conversation was dull, and we never ended up using them once. Like, it was just, oh, it was so cool, and yeah.
So what do you think a church can get from trying to bridge the generations like that? What are some of the benefits and the blessings that you see coming from intergenerational ministry?
I don't know, I just feel like if there's that bridge there, like if we got rid of it and everyone could just serve together, we could accomplish so much more.
Nice. Nice. One of our hopes is to continue that, to find ways that we can get some of our high school and middle school students getting to meet older members of the congregation and opening that up. It's easy in a big church to stick with people in your own age, and it doesn't matter if you're a high schooler or if you're an older adult or a middle-aged adult like me. We tend to gather around with our people, but there's a lot we can learn from each other.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit. You started volunteering at hospice when you were how old?
18.
And what kinds of things do you do? Describe what you do when you're there.
I am an 11th hour volunteer, and so basically I go sit with patients in the middle of the night oftentimes, and that's oftentimes when they pass away. So I end up being like, especially if there's someone who's passing away and they don't have anyone, like their family is out of town or they can't get there immediately, they call me and I go sit with them.
Yeah, so what do you do? Yeah, no, keep talking. What do you do? I bet many of us have never been in a situation like that.
So I will basically, like, most of them will be unresponsive, and so I just sit with them, hold their hand, pray a lot, just make them feel at peace. The first, you want me to talk about? Okay. The first time it happened, like when I was with someone when they actually did pass away, I thought I was going to pass out. I was so scared. I had no idea what to expect. That was totally divine intervention that I got through that. But the support and like how grateful the family was to me in that time, I was just overwhelmed. Like they kept saying like, you are literally an angel. You're an angel to our family. Like, we don't know what we would have done if you wouldn't have been here. And I was just like, no, like, I mean, I didn't really do that much, you know. I felt like I was just a body in the room. But, yeah, that was, so I kept going with it, and here I am 2 years later, and I just absolutely love it. That during those times is when I feel closest to God. And I think that's sort of what, I don't know, it's not like a happy thing, but it's like being able to be with someone as God brings them home is that's a pretty special thing.
Yeah, in our lesson today, the gospel text or the lesson today talks about when the three visitors come to Abraham and he doesn't know that it's God. He doesn't know that they're with a message from God. And some of what you take away is that we don't always know when we're with people how they're bearing God's presence. And it sounds like God uses you. It is a gift for a family to know that their grandma or aunt or friend wasn't alone at those times. Do you feel like God gives you the strength that it takes to be there in a situation like that? What has that done for your faith?
Yeah. I don't feel like I'm that strong of a person, but I think that God makes me strong. Yeah, what was the second part of your question?
What has it done with your faith?
Oh, it's strengthened my faith a ton, but it's also challenged it, because I start to question, like, why is God letting this happen to these people? Like, so I feel frustrated, I feel excited that He's bringing me so close to Him, and I feel excited that He's using me in such cool ways, but it's a whirlwind.
We're in a culture that doesn't like to talk about death, and we don't like to sit around and think about how we're going to die, or we don't know necessarily what happens after you die. Have you, is that something that you've become more comfortable with, or when people find out you volunteer at hospice,
They think I'm crazy.
Okay, why?
Everyone thinks I'm crazy, and I try to explain it, but they just people don't get it. Like, like when I trained to be a volunteer, I was everyone else I think was over 50 in my group, and I expected that, I really did, but it was like, I got a lot of, you're 18 years old, like, what are you doing here? And I was just like, you know what, like, leave me alone, let me try it. But I feel like, I don't know, it's really shaped me as a person because, like, I don't know how to say this, like, being around death makes you realize, like, what are you doing with your life kind of thing. Like, what can you do here before you get there sort of thing. So I feel like when I talk to people, I'm like, okay, like, what are you doing to make a difference? Because this is coming, like, you know?
Has being a hospice volunteer helped you make some peace with the death of your friend when you were younger? How does that piece fit together for you?
I mean, I still don't understand it because, like, when suicide is like, I still don't get it. Like, no one saw it coming, and like that's really a hard thing to cope with, especially when you're 12. But I feel comfort knowing that he's in a better place, even if I didn't want him to leave so soon.
So tell me a little bit about your time in Africa. You set off for a foreign continent by yourself on a program. Describe a little bit. What was your program like, and tell us some good stories.
Okay. So the program was through an organization called Gap Medics. It's a company that primarily sets up job shadowing for pre-med students in a foreign country, basically. I needed an internship for the program that I'm in to graduate, and I had a friend who did it the year before and was like, if you want to go to Africa, you need to do this. And so I was like, okay, if you think it was the bomb, like, I'll do it too. Let's do it. And so, like, I spent all last year, like, getting ready for it, and then it came, and I was like a mess, leaving my family. Here I was like, oh yeah, like, I'm leaving. And then my dad dropped me off at the airport, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. I'm crazy. But no, it was the best thing I've ever done, the scariest thing I've ever done. And so I was there for 5 weeks, and each week I was in a different department. So I started out in OBGYN, and then I went to pediatrics, internal medicine, surgery, and then the ER my last week. And there was a lot of culture shock. I was like, my first day in OBGYN, we were there for 2 minutes, and the nurse said, okay, we're going in for a C-section, and I was like, okay, like, I'll go get my stuff on, I can do this. And I walked in, and the patient was screaming bloody murder on the table because they were opening her up with no anesthetic. Oh, and I was like, on the floor. Like, oh my gosh. That doesn't happen. Like, it was crazy. And so it took like, okay, like a day to adjust to that and get used to like how they do life in Africa. And like my whole time there, I felt frustrated a lot of it because I got super close to the patients that the physicians had me interact with, because like we had to learn some Swahili, and then they would be like, okay, like, go diagnose your patient, and I'm like, okay. But a lot of them have like conditions that if they were anywhere else they could be cured, but because they're there and they don't have the proper supplies and resources and education, they don't make it. And that is really a hard thing to cope with, and I can't stand it when I think about it. But yeah, I went on a safari. That was a highlight. I also went horseback riding while I was there. Horses are like my biggest fear, and that took a lot of peer pressure, but I did it, and it was great. And by the time my 5 weeks came to an end, I felt like I had finally gotten a routine, and I was sort of getting used to living there, and then I had to come home, and I was so sad. I was home for not even 24 hours, and my mom was like, so, like, are you happy to be home? And I was like, well, I had some good food, I had a shower, but I'm ready to go back now. And she was so upset. She did not want to hear that.
So what do you think you learned from the people in Africa? given the way that things are different and some of the things you saw?
I learned that no matter how much you have, that won't necessarily make you happy. Actually, when I got there, I was expecting that they were going to be really not happy to see us because, well, us being like, there was other students there from different countries around the world. Lots of people from England, a couple from Australia, Singapore. Anyways, so I was expecting them to be like, oh, what are you doing here? Like, you're from America. But they were the most happy, welcoming people I've ever encountered in my whole life, and they make the people here look like we're just miserable, honestly. Like, they have like the bare minimum in order to get by, but they're still like, okay, it's another day, like, let's go. What can we do?
Nice. So you talked a little bit about your faith, kind of questioning when you see some of the suffering that was going on over there. How has that affected your outlook on what God is up to?
It's affected it a lot. I spent the few weeks after I got home, I was super angry. Like, my emotions were just all over the place because before I left, I asked my mentors to email me and keep me updated on like the patients that I interacted with. Every single email I got, they had all passed away. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't understand. What, like, that's not fair. Why them and not me? And so that was, I mean, I still don't get it, and I'm still wrestling with it, but I don't know, God's present there, and I know that much, and I feel comfort in knowing that He hasn't forgotten about them. But now it's more like God's wrestling in my heart, trying to figure out, okay, if you're so, like, what can you do about it? What are you going to do?
So one story I heard was that you had something to do about toilet paper in Africa. Tell us.
My mentor in internal medicine was obsessed with, like, every afternoon we would have lecture after the mornings were spent in the hospital actually doing stuff. The afternoons we had lecture with one of the doctors. My mentor in internal medicine, every single lecture was on typhoid and food poisoning. And he kept saying, oh my gosh, like, if we had like toilet paper, paper towels, soap, yeah, they don't have any of that, which is really gross. Like, we would be so much better off. And so when I came home, me and two of my best friends that I met there were super like, oh my God, like, we're home. What can we do to still help them while we're here? And so I had one friend who she's like, okay, I'm gonna work on hand sanitizer. My other friend was like, okay, I'm gonna work on soap and paper towels. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'll work on toilet paper. So I called up Charmin headquarters and I was like, hey, wanna help me out and sponsor this great hospital? Like, they really need toilet paper. Even like, just ship them a big box every month. Like, do something, just anything you can do to help. I think I was probably like in tears on the phone with him. But, so then they had me transferred to Procter & Gamble. And so I'm now working with Procter & Gamble to get, like, they're super gung-ho about it and they really want to do it. But the problem that we're running into is that the Tanzanian government is super strict on what they let into their country. And so we're sort of finagling around like all of that. But from the looks of it, this hospital is going to have toilet paper, so that's exciting.
Excellent. All it takes is a good idea and a little gumption to get on the phone.
Yeah.
So, nice.
So if anyone needs toilet paper, I know the president.
So along the way, as we've been talking about God calling us to make a difference in the world, part of our challenge is to figure out what does that look like and how do we hear God calling. So one thing we've talked about, Katie, is that God comes and speaks to us through other people. So who have been some of the people along the way that have either encouraged you or named things that they've seen God doing in you that have helped you hear God's voice?
My grandma was the one, well, I guess she fell, which was terrible, but she was the one she's like my best friend. But so seeing her in that state was sort of like the first thing that was like, get going, like this is your thing, like you need to go do it. And then, but like every single day I hear people, not even like people that I'm super close to, but they like, if they see me interacting with an elderly person or like really anyone, the thing that they pick out that like sticks out for me is like, I'm really good at listening. And I love just like sit and listen to someone talk and learn about them. And so I think like, I was like, okay, well, if that's what I'm good at, like I should probably think about doing something that highlights that skill. But I don't know, like everyone I'm close with has sort of not shaped me. Like it's really been like my journey with God that's kind of shaped me and like everything that I've been through. But I don't know, I feel like everyone I come across is sort of, okay, keep going, you can do it. So, yeah.
An encouraging word makes all the difference. So where do you think God has stretched you the most?
Well, I thought at the time I was being stretched the most when I went into hospice. But then I was strong enough to do that, and I got good at it. But I think this summer is when I was stretched the most, just because like I've always thought of God as being like the one that makes everything good. But like, I mean, he doesn't make stuff bad, but like he's there when bad stuff happens. It's not all like, wahoo, God. And so I've sort of been like, oh, like, why are you letting this happen? So I've been wrestling a lot with him, but I think that that's made me a lot closer to him. So yeah, this summer for sure. But this picture right here, this was in Africa. There was a rock a couple blocks away from where I was staying, and we would hike up there every week and just sit and watch the sunset. And I feel like that sort of like, I don't know, represents my relationship with God in a way. Like, I felt pretty close to him then. That was the day after I had a patient who, she was 65, and she had septic tonsillitis, and she didn't end up making it. And that was the day after that. So, yeah, but I was feeling super frustrated and really let down because her and I got close. I couldn't understand a word she was saying, but even just like being able to sit next to her bedside and be with her as she, at the end, was pretty cool. But I was like, okay, God, like you're letting, like this stuff is happening, but I know you're still here, so.
It's interesting because from the picture, you could be reaching out to receive God, or you could be giving it back to God, shaking your hands at. And sometimes that's the relationship of faith, is keeping that conversation going.
Yeah.
It's not always easy to know what God is up to in your life and why things happen the way they do.
Yeah.
But shaking your fist at God is better than turning your back on God.
That's true.
So, nice. So, tell me a little bit about your future. Where do you want to leave your mark on this world?
I was thinking about this morning. I know I'm not Superwoman, but I want to help as many people as I can. And I don't know, I don't even care, like if I don't become a doctor, like fine, whatever. But I just want to help people in any way that I can. I want to keep putting smiles on people's faces, just like little things.
Do you feel like God is calling you to a specific purpose?
Well, he keeps opportunities keep popping up in the area of like geriatrics and palliative care, and I feel like since that's what he's like been leading me down this far, like maybe that's what I'm meant to do, and like, or my calling, but it's so hard to know. And everyone tells me that's my calling, like that's what I was born to do, but they could just be saying that to make me feel like I know what I'm doing.
It's not such a bad thing. So, do you think it matters if this is a call from God or not?
Yeah, I think it's important that everyone like sort of figures out like what they're good at, what they feel like that are meant to do, because we were all created for a purpose. God knew, yep, you're gonna do this and you're gonna be great at it, and if we're not doing that, then what's the point?
Okay, but you could say that at 20 with lots of years ahead of you.
Yeah.
So tell me how the people that you sit with, I mean, what would you say to them in terms of still finding the sense that God is using them at 65 or 85 or 105?
The patients that I sit with?
Sure.
Well, the thing is, I sort of, like, before I go sit with them, I get, like, a debriefing sort of on, like, what they're like, what their interests are, what their job was, sort of thing. So going in, I sort of, like, not know them, but know them. And so I know what great things they've done, but, like, at that stage, they're sort of, like, I don't know, they've sort of done their thing. They're ready to go home now. And so, but they just need to know that, like, they were great and, like, it's okay for them to go now.
Nice. There's a great quote, I think it's by Mother Teresa, that says, "There are no great things, there are only small things done with great love." And it certainly seems like along the way you've had a chance to show that great love in many different areas along the way. So what do you think is next in your life?
Well, I need to finish college first. I'm a junior this year, and then next year I'm going up to the Twin Cities to do a minor in public and global health. So, yay God. But like right now, everything's all about getting ready for the MCAT, and everyone keeps asking, so when are you going to go to medical school? And I really don't know the answer to that. I know I want to, but I don't know, like the last month and a half or so, I've had the Peace Corps on my mind hardcore. And so I think probably after graduation, that's where I'll be. But I don't know if God has a better plan. That's where I'll be.
Curveballs.
Curveballs.
Nice. Well, I appreciate you sharing your story. I want to give people a chance to ask questions. So if you've got a question for Katie, something you want to know more about, or stories that you want her to share, Harlan Wicker has got our auxiliary microphone. We'd love to open that up and give you a chance to ask her questions. Be brave.
Yeah.
This isn't a question, but you said when you were with this lady that was dying, you didn't feel you were doing anything. I think the main thing you were doing is that you were there. That's the main thing, you were there with her.
Yeah.
We talk about a ministry of presence and what it means to be Jesus' presence when you're with people.
I think at the time, that was like the first time I had done it. And so I had no idea what to expect, but at the time I felt like I needed to be doing something more. So, but now I'm realizing that's not it. Like, just to be there with them is the important thing.
How many people have you been with along the way?
More than I can count on two hands, I know that.
Does it get easier, or is it still kind of tough?
Well, like, I thought it was getting easier like a couple months ago, and then I had one, and I was a hot mess afterwards, which usually isn't the case. I can usually handle it pretty well. But like, I'd only been with him for a couple hours, but the whole next week, I was like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe, like I didn't think I was gonna make it through it. So I took a step back, and I haven't done it for a while now, but I'll get back into it pretty soon. So it's just, I think it's like, especially when it comes to this, like you have to know like your sort of how much you can take, because if I were to just keep going, I would get so burned out.
Katie, thanks so much for sharing with us and for the intergenerational meals that we had. We were participants and enjoyed that very much. I was just wondering if you've had a chance to read the Lenten Breakfast Faith Stories books that have come out of Zumbro, and if you haven't, maybe just suggest that you take a chance to look at those, because a lot of people have shared their faith stories and mentioned things that have been meaningful to their lives. And I remember one in particular where a person was struggling with how God was not taking care of things for them, and they finally got a message that said it wasn't their job to understand, but to be there and to continue going. And so I would just encourage you to take a look at those books when you get a chance.
I would do that.
Katie, I'm one of the old folks you love to be with. But enjoyed your reflections. My question is, somewhere in your early teens, you became convinced that God was real and in your life. Did you have a religious experience then, where you kind of saw God or had something happen, or what made you get on the path at that time?
I mean, I had sort of been on the path, like going to church and like doing all that. It was just that, so I knew he was there. I just didn't feel like I was like, I had my own personal, unique relationship with him. But it was after those two deaths that I was like, I don't know how to get through this. I don't know like what's happening right now, and like, so, and I didn't feel like I could talk out loud to like my parents or anyone else. And so as I started to pray, like I don't know, I just felt him like putting his arms around me, or, you know, like I just felt like he was more present in my life specifically.
So this summer, God stretched you in a different way, and for someone who loves to work with older people, this summer Katie was one of our chaperones for our middle school mission trip, complete opposite end of this age spectrum. We have a number of those middle schoolers here with us today. So what do you think you could share with them about, as someone who is maybe 12, 13, 14, how do they start to build that relationship with God?
I don't know, it's different for everyone, but I just felt like when I was in middle school and like confirmation was great and I learned a lot, but I feel like in order to, like, you need to pray and like just devote time to be with God, like just you and him, and sort of figure out like, okay, like what do you want me to do, like what's this relationship gonna be like? Because I feel like that's not something you can learn from sitting in a classroom and learning stories from the Bible, in my opinion. But yeah, just spend time with him, and if he's like putting things in your path that he thinks you would be good at, don't shut him out. Just, you can be mad about it and you can fight him and throw your fists at him, but don't shut him out, and just try and trust him and follow him.
More questions for Katie? I'd asked you to share some of your favorite scripture verses, and we're gonna pop them up on the screen, and I'm gonna have you guys do a little work. Boy, tell us about this quote.
Oh, this was a quote that says the angels are near to those who are grieving, to whisper to them that their loved ones are safe in the hands of God. And I can't remember where I found that, but I know that I've encountered a lot of death in with people close to me, and so that I feel like it's always just helped me. It's a good reminder, even though they're gone, they're okay and they're in a good place. It's just a good reminder.
All right, and when we talked, you said this is your, oh, sorry.
Well, you have such a good grasp on death being a part of our life cycle, and so many people don't get that. How do you explain, if you were to explain that to someone, how would you do that? How would you say it?
Everyone knows that it's obviously it's going to happen, but I feel like it's hard to put into words. It's a tricky thing. But when I had a class last week, and we had a girl come in, and we're trying to in my program, each of us does a capstone. So our last year, we sort of personalize our education. Mine is my global health minor, to sort of personalize your education and get you closer to where you want to do. And she compared it to death. And we watched a documentary on a guy who was at death, and it was sort of thinking about the now in terms of what we're headed towards. It's going to happen eventually, but what can you do now to sort of leave your mark on the world? I don't know, does that answer your question? It's hard. It's just, it puts into perspective your life. It's, you don't know how much time you have. My friend died when he was 12. We could all die tomorrow, who knows? What can you do to get meaning out of your life before God decides he wants you to come home, sort of. Okay, you can keep going.
All right, so when we were talking, Katie said this is her very, very favorite verse from the Bible, Joshua 1:9. Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And when we were thinking about, Katie and I was thinking about your life and all of the ways that that verse has maybe defined or guided who you are, the kind of strength and courage that God has given you along the way, and the places that God is taking you that you weren't necessarily expecting. It made me think part of all of our listening for God's calling is to maybe do a little contemplating about ways in our past that we have been strong and courageous, and places that God has brought us that we wouldn't necessarily have expected. So you all have to do a little bit of work. You're going to have about 3 minutes to find some people around you to introduce yourselves, and taking a look at this quote from Joshua, see if you can identify one way or one place that God has given you strength and courage to do something you didn't think you could do, or a place that God has taken you that you weren't expecting to go. Got it? Good. Turn and discuss. All right, Katie was brave enough to share her stories of how God gave her strength and courage to do things. What have you guys done? What were some of the stories that you shared with one another? Or were you all talking about other stuff and not doing the assignments? All right, Erlene. Wait, Harlan's coming with the mic.
I'd like to introduce Autumn, right? And she is working for Home Instead. So I don't know if you all know her that well, but she went out on a limb, picked up a shopper type paper from Dodge Center, which she normally threw in the garbage, and saw this ad for this, and had been a stay-at-home mom, but she stepped out there after all those years, and she said she hasn't, she's somewhat feels she's paralleled some of the things you do, done some hospice, but and brings Jean to church on
Nice.
Sundays, so I told them we're grateful for that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
Excellent. Who else? How else has God given you courage to do something or go somewhere you wouldn't otherwise be able to do or go? Thanks, George.
Well, I am a Y mentor, and what was my calling to do that? It was just the fact that I'm a member of the YMCA, and for the times that I've been down there, I always pass this bulletin board that's in the second floor, and it always indicates that there is a need for Y mentors. And I've seen it a lot, and I guess my orientation from being a teacher and having dealt with a lot of youth over the time, that I thought that was something that would be a good example of how our church could be an outreach, and it could be through me. And so I decided that that was some point in time. I thought about it a lot of times because I've been by that bulletin board, and they typically have how many people are in need of a mentor, and it's huge. It's probably 90 or something like that or more now. And I also realized that there are not a lot of men that are going to step up and do mentoring. For some reason or other, women are seemingly more willing to do it. So I thought, well, this is my opportunity, and it was my response for our church doing an outreach.
Nice, thank you. Sometimes it's seeing a need and recognizing that if not you, then who? Nice. Anyone else want to share? Well, I want to say thank you. Thank you to Katie for sharing her story and her passion, and some of it along the way as you are out and about, keeping an ear open for God's voice and watching for opportunities to serve is one thing, but the other thing that's just as important is maybe being someone who can name what they see in the world around them, naming for young people or friends or folks who don't feel like they might have a lot to give, that God is working through them, and that's the way that you become God's voice speaking to someone else. So thank you for sharing your passion and for sharing your story today. I invite you to come back next week. We'll be continuing these stories of God's calling.